everybody in the country is rightfully focusing on what happened in Boston. It's a terrible tragedy. A lot of people were killed, obviously, and it's terrorism. We're all fascinated by it, me included. I spent a lot of time on the show talking about it. Now, I've also spent a decent amount of time talking about the explosion in West Texas. As you're about to see here, it actually took more lives. And I want to tell you some amazing numbers and facts about it that might get you to think about what our priorities are in terms of what actually gets a lot more Americans killed. So, first of all, in West Texas, when the fertilizer plant blew up, 14 people were killed and over 160 were injured. In comparison, in the Boston Marathon bombing, 3 people were killed and over 250 were injured. Now, look, more people were injured, and then, of course, remember the MIT police officer was also later killed in a shootout, and another officer was shot. Both are horrible tragedies. One doesn't have to be bigger than the other. But it's just an interesting note that they are both very large casualties and very large tragedies, obviously, right? And you would obviously want to protect U.S. citizens from both, right? Well, to give you a sense of scale of how often these things happen, whether it's something that happens in a workplace or an act of terrorism, well, we have the numbers on it in 2011. 4,609 Americans were killed in workplace accidents. 17 Americans died in terrorist attacks. Now, look, some of those workplace accidents were probably not preventable. They were accidents. Now, on the other hand, as I'm about to show you, a lot of them probably were preventable, and it depends on the kind of regulations that we take. And if we could prevent more of those deaths, we've got over 4,000 there to deal with, we might save a lot of Americans' lives. So, and it's not to say you don't focus on terrorism. I hope to God that our government can do both, right? But one has gotten a lot of focus and one has not gotten very much focus. In fact, speaking of not focused, my God, OSHA, the place that's supposed to protect us from workplace accidents like this, did you know that they have not inspected this plant since 1985? Jesus, man, it's been decades. Nobody even bothered to look. Now, it turns out that this plant did not have sprinklers, it didn't have shut-off valves, it didn't have fire alarms, and it didn't have the legally required blast walls. It's a fertilizer plant. It's not like this is the first time fertilizer is blown up. The worst accident in American history happened with, you guessed it, fertilizers in Texas. It was back in 1947, killed over 500 people. A fertilizer plant blew up in France a little after 9/11. It was fertilizer that was used to blow up the Oklahoma City building. You might want to do some regulation on a fertilizer plant. Okay, it turns out, especially this plant, it had 1,350 times the legally allowed amount of highly explosive ammonium nitrate. 1,350 times the legally allowed amount. You might have wanted to look into that plant a little bit. You might have saved a lot of lives if you had. Now, here's an amazing comparison. Timothy McVeigh, when he used fertilizer to blow up the Oklahoma City building, had 2 tons of ammonium nitrate, okay? 2 tons is a lot. The West fertilizer plant held 270 tons of ammonium nitrate. 2 versus 270. Now, some conservatives and some libertarians will say, no, it's okay, you just self-regulate. Well, it turns out this plant did self-regulate. The EPA asked them, hey, how you doing? And they said, oh, don't worry about it, we're doing great. They said, what is the worst case scenario? Quote, there is no risk of fire or explosion at the facility. They said the worst case scenario was you might smell some ammonium from time to time. No risk of fire or explosion. Is that how it turned out? Obviously not. Now, look. In 1969, there was a terrible coal mining accident. Walter Cronkite went down there and covered it for 4 straight days. It was in the middle of winter, in the middle of nowhere, and he went down there, rolled up his sleeves, and got America to pay attention to it. Now, these days, now I know there was another terrible tragedy in the same week, captured our attention, right? But you also might want to look into this, because so far what the media and everybody else is doing is, oh, it's an accident, nothing can be done. It's an accident, nothing can be done. That's not true. What they did after the accident happened in the mines, and Walter Cronkite put attention to it, they actually passed a bill in 1969 to protect coal workers in this country, miners. Now you want to see what happened, the number of accidents we had in 1968 before the bill, it was 311 fatal accidents per year. Per year. In 2012, we had that down to 19. Does regulation work? You bet your ass it works. Now look, not every regulation works, not everyone is wise. Can you have overregulation? Of course you can. Depends on the circumstances. But there's a lot of circumstances where you can do great benefit to the American worker by actually protecting him. Whether they're coal miners who work in very dangerous situations, or it's people who work at fertilizer plants or live near fertilizer plants. Dozens of buildings around the area were destroyed, including a school and a nursing home. When they've got that much ammonium nitrate there, please, for the love of God, do an inspection at the very least every year and make sure they're not breaking the regulations and that you regulate this stuff so that people don't die needlessly. But, you know, we've had one Republican congressman who actually said that they need a lot more aid down in Texas now because of the explosion, and I agree with him. His name is Bill Flores. But at the same time, he had said the people who were affected by Sandy, not interested. He voted down a bill, now it passed anyway, but he voted against it, for aid to people who were victims of Hurricane Sandy. Now that's a classy guy, but that's not all. Turns out he wanted to cut OSHA's budget, and he did. He voted in 2011 to cut, now you know what OSHA is, right? It's the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, the people who are supposed to make sure our workplaces are safe. He cut their budget by $99 million. And now he wants more money because of the results and the consequences of his actions. Well, you might not have wanted to cut that budget in the first place. And how much money do we spend fighting terrorism? And by the way, how many trillions of dollars did we spend starting wars because of our reaction to terrorism? If we had spent a fraction of that to make sure our own workers were safe, we would save so many more lives. The reality is we can do reasonable reactions to both terrorism and to horrible events that happen in the workplace. And I don't want to say accidents, that's why I paused, because a lot of these are preventable, and I don't want you to brush it off as like, oh, nothing can be done, it's just an accident, somebody just tripped. That's not how it is. You should have never had that plant filled to the rim with those kind of explosives. All right, by the way, Kevin Ward Jr. made a great point, and so did Mike Elk. Mike Elk's the guy who covered this for the Washington Post, did a great job with it. And he quotes Ken as saying, terrorists want media attention, so we give it to them. Unsafe industries don't want media attention, so we give that to them. Yeah, well, that's a pretty interesting point right there. So that seems kind of backwards. Now, one final point here. The residents near the plant, they're not blaming the people who own the plant. Apparently, it's a local guy who does. He's on the school board. He's a little older. You know, some think that he bought the plant just to be able to keep it running so that people in the local area could have a job. I don't know anything about the guy. He might be the sweetest guy in the world. I do know he broke the rules and it had terrible consequences, and they should certainly look into what rules were broken. But Jeanette Carlick says, these are good people, and I feel so sorry for Mr. Adair. Yeah, but I also feel sorry for the people who died there and the people who got blown up. Ed Sikora says, and he's a local guy in the community, I don't question it. There's no way that there was a problem there where they knew something was going to happen. That's not the people they are. They're good Church of Christ people. If Adair had an inkling, he would have shut that thing down. Look, again, I don't know this Adair guy, okay? But I do know that if you know that you've got 1,350 times the legally allowed limit, and you keep packing those explosives, possibly explosive material in there, well, you got to know that your negligence has consequences. Now, we'll let the legal system obviously judge if he was legally negligent, but obviously there was something tremendously wrong there. That's why you can't cut corners. That's why you need regulations. Next time a conservative knucklehead tells you that you don't need any regulations, remember West Texas.